In the waning years of World War II, the United States became host to approximately 425,000 German prisoners of war. Scattered across the nation, these POWs were housed in over 700 camps, each serving as a temporary home for men who had once taken up arms against the Allies. One such camp was Camp Concordia, located in the plains of Kansas. Established in 1943, Camp Concordia was one of the largest POW camps in the United States, with a capacity to hold up to 4,000 prisoners at any given time. The camp was laid out in a grid pattern, with rows of wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire fences and guard towers manned by units of the U.S. Army Military Police. Within these confines, the daily life of the German POWs was structured and regulated by War Department circulars and governed by the Geneva Convention. These documents outlined the responsibilities of both captors and captives, ensuring that the prisoners were treated humanely while also requiring them to contribute to the war effort through labor. The logistics of prisoner labor were meticulously recorded in U.S. Army Provost Marshal General Records, which detailed the various assignments carried out by the POWs across industries such as agriculture, canneries, lumber, railroads, grocery stores, and factories. By 1944, the demand for agricultural labor had intensified as American servicemen were deployed overseas and the domestic labor force was stretched thin. This led to contracts being established between the U.S. government and local farmers, allowing German POWs to work in fields and processing plants. In return, these prisoners received wages in the form of coupons, which could be used to purchase goods at the camp canteen. The wages were modest, yet they provided a sense of purpose and normalcy for many of the POWs. Despite their contributions, the POWs were acutely aware of the disparities in food systems between the United States and their homeland. Red Cross inspections of the camps ensured that dietary standards were met, but the abundance of food available in America was a stark contrast to the rationing policies that had been in place in Germany for years. The camp newspapers, often run by the POWs themselves, reported on these differences with a tone of incredulity, highlighting the surplus of bread, vegetables, and meat that seemed to flow effortlessly from American farms and factories. It was in the context of these labor assignments that a group of German POWs found themselves working in a logistics facility, tasked with sorting food destined for a nearby town. As they moved crates of fruit and boxes of canned goods, they observed American workers discarding slightly bruised apples and unfinished meals into large bins. For prisoners raised under strict rationing, where every morsel was conserved and utilized, this waste was shocking. The U.S. Army's records indicate that such practices were not uncommon, as the abundance of American agricultural output often led to surplus that was considered not worth the paperwork to salvage. The incident, mundane in its occurrence, was a pivotal moment of realization for many of the German POWs. The piles of discarded food, bread, vegetables, and meat served as a tangible representation of the vast resources at the disposal of the United States. The POWs, who were accustomed to the scarcity and ingenuity required to make the most of limited supplies, were confronted with an overwhelming sense of disparity. In their camp newspapers, they documented the experience with a factual detachment, noting the irony of their labor in a land of plenty while their families back home were boiling potato peels to survive. Civilian attitudes towards the German POWs varied, but in many cases, the prisoners were seen more as a labor resource than enemies. Recorded incidents in local newspapers and transportation logs reflect a pragmatic acceptance of the POW's presence, with some communities expressing gratitude for their contributions to the local economy. However, there were also instances of tension, particularly when the prisoners' living conditions were perceived to be too comfortable compared to those of American servicemen fighting overseas. Within the camp, discipline was maintained through a combination of military oversight and self-regulation by the POWs. Medical access was ensured through the presence of camp hospitals, and mail services allowed the prisoners to maintain contact with their families in Germany. Educational opportunities were offered through YMCA programs, which provided classes in various subjects from languages to technical skills. These programs were part of a broader effort to prepare the POWs for eventual repatriation and reintegration into post-war society. As the war drew to a close, the focus shifted towards the repatriation and re-education of the German POWs. Directives issued by the War Department outlined the processes for returning the prisoners to Germany, emphasizing the need for an ideological dismantling of Nazi beliefs. This was to be achieved not through direct confrontation, but rather through exposure to democratic ideals and the realities of American society. The experiences of the POWs in the United States, particularly their encounters with American abundance and waste, played a subtle yet significant role in this process. While the ideological shift was not immediate or universal, the systems and environments encountered by the POWs provided a framework for understanding the broader socio-economic differences between the two nations. In conclusion, the day that German prisoners witnessed American waste was more than just an observation of surplus. It was a moment of clarity that underscored the profound disparities between their war-torn homeland and the resource-rich United States. This realization, recorded in the annals of camp newspapers and government records, marked a turning point in their understanding of defeat, not just on the battlefield, but in the fundamental structures of society. In the months following their unsettling experience at the logistics facility, the German prisoners at Camp Concordia carried with them a new awareness of the vast disparity in resources between their homeland and the United States. The image of discarded food haunted them, a stark representation of the abundance they could never have imagined during the harshest years of the war in Germany. This was not just about sustenance, it was a window into a world where waste was possible, because abundance was the norm. Life at Camp Concordia continued under the structured regimen dictated by the U.S. Army Provost Marshal General's records and the guidelines set forth by the Geneva Convention. The camp was a microcosm of military order, where each day unfolded with precision and predictability. The prisoners engaged in various work assignments, primarily in agriculture, assisting with the harvests that helped sustain local communities. These assignments were not only a means of contributing to the local economy, but also a way to keep the prisoners occupied, their bodies engaged, and their minds momentarily distracted from the thoughts of home and the war's aftermath. The camp's environment was meticulously organized. The barracks were arranged in neat rows, each housing dozens of prisoners who shared stories of their pre-war lives and speculated about the future. These conversations were a lifeline, a way to maintain a connection to their identities before the war had uprooted their lives. The mess hall served meals that, while simple, were plentiful, compared to the meager rations many had known before their capture. The abundance of food was a daily reminder of the differences between the two nations at war. Each day followed a predictable pattern, offering a semblance of normalcy in the aftermath of global conflict. The prisoners awoke to the sound of a bugle, signaling the start of another day in confinement. After breakfast, they lined up for roll call, a ritual that reinforced the military discipline governing their lives. The afternoons were spent working in the fields or attending educational sessions designed to broaden their understanding of the world outside Germany. Beyond the camp's perimeter, the surrounding Kansas landscape stretched out in vast expanses of farmland, a testament to the agricultural wealth of the region. The fields seemed to go on forever, golden waves of wheat swaying in the wind, a stark contrast to the bombed-out cities and rationed supplies that had become their reality in Germany. The prisoners occasionally participated in excursions beyond the camp to assist with labor-intensive tasks on nearby farms. These trips served dual purposes: meeting labor needs and subtly exposing the POWs to American society and its values, an aspect of the broader ideological re-education efforts. The American military authorities were keenly aware of the need to address the prisoners' ideological beliefs. While outright indoctrination was avoided, the exposure to American life was intended to challenge the deeply ingrained tenets of Nazism. The POWs were introduced to concepts of democratic governance, individual freedoms, and economic prosperity, often subtly integrated into their daily experiences and interactions with American civilians. They observed the ease with which Americans moved about their lives, unburdened by the oppressive oversight that had characterized Nazi rule. As the war drew to a close, plans for repatriation began to take shape. The logistics of returning such a large number of prisoners to their home country were complex, involving coordination between military and civilian agencies. The War Department circulars outlined the procedures, emphasizing the importance of orderly and humane processes in line with international agreements. This meticulous planning underscored the American commitment to adhering to international law, even in the treatment of former enemies. For many prisoners, the prospect of returning to a war-torn Germany was daunting. Reports filtering into the camp spoke of cities reduced to rubble, shortages of essential goods, and political upheaval. Yet the desire to reunite with family and rebuild their lives outweighed these fears. The prisoners' discussions often turned to plans for the future, with aspirations ranging from resuming civilian careers to participating in the reconstruction of their homeland. These conversations were filled with both hope and trepidation, as the men contemplated what awaited them in a country that had fundamentally changed. Throughout this period, the interactions between the POWs and the American personnel overseeing the camp remained generally cordial. The American officers and guards tasked with maintaining order recognized the importance of treating the prisoners with respect, adhering to the principles set out in international law. While there were occasional tensions, particularly over perceived inequities in treatment compared to American soldiers, these were largely mitigated by the structured environment and the focus on mutual respect. The guards often engaged in conversations with the prisoners, learning about their lives and providing a humanizing connection amid the backdrop of war. As part of the re-education efforts, the prisoners were sometimes shown films or given access to reading materials that depicted American life and values. While the effectiveness of these measures varied, they nonetheless provided glimpses into a way of life that many POWs had never before considered. The contrast between their experiences and the ideals presented in these materials was stark, prompting reflection and, in some cases, a re-evaluation of previously held beliefs. Some prisoners found themselves questioning the narratives they had been taught, considering the possibility of a world where freedom and opportunity were accessible to all. The end of the war brought a gradual shift in the camp's dynamics. With the cessation of hostilities, the urgency of wartime operations diminished, allowing for a slight relaxation of the previously stringent routines. The prisoners sensed this change as the atmosphere within the camp grew less tense and discussions about the future took on a more hopeful tone. The guards, too, seemed to relax, their roles shifting from enforcers to facilitators of the prisoners' eventual transition back to civilian life. The American officer who had casually dismissed the notion of paperwork for the wasted food continued to oversee operations at the logistics facility. While his interactions with the prisoners were limited, his attitude remained emblematic of the broader American perspective on abundance and efficiency. For the POWs, this perspective was both bewildering and illuminating, highlighting the differences in how resources were valued and managed. It was a lesson in contrasts, one that would linger in their minds long after they had left Camp Concordia. As preparations for repatriation intensified, the prisoners experienced a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The orderly process of documentation and medical examinations began, ensuring that each individual was fit to travel and properly accounted for. The U.S. Army Provost Marshal General's records meticulously documented these procedures, underscoring the importance of adhering to established protocols. The process was a testament to the discipline and organization that had characterized their time in captivity. The day of departure was marked by a somber sense of finality. The POWs gathered their belongings, each man carrying the weight of his experiences and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. As they boarded the trains that would transport them to ports for the journey across the Atlantic, the reality of leaving behind the camp, its routines, its challenges, and its unexpected insights settled in. The trains were filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the clatter of wheels on tracks and the occasional murmur of conversation. For the American personnel who had managed the camp, the departure of the POWs was a significant milestone, signaling the end of a complex chapter in the post-war landscape. While their roles had been defined by duty and regulation, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared human experiences that had unfolded within the camp's boundaries. The guards and officers watched the trains pull away, knowing that their interactions had been part of a larger narrative of healing and reconciliation. As the trains pulled away from Camp Concordia, the German prisoners looked out at the Kansas plains one last time. The memories of their time in the United States, particularly the moments of stark contrast like the scene at the logistics facility, would linger long after their return to Germany. These experiences, while deeply personal, were part of a broader narrative of transformation and reflection, shaping their understanding of defeat and the world beyond their homeland. In the years that followed, many former POWs would speak of their time in America as a formative period, one that challenged their preconceptions and exposed them to a world of possibilities. The lessons learned, both explicit and implicit, contributed to the gradual rebuilding of their lives and the reconstruction of a nation seeking to redefine its place in a changed world. The experience of German POWs at Camp Concordia during World War II serves as an unexpected lens through which they viewed the juxtaposition of wartime realities. This period in history offers a unique perspective on the contrasting socio-economic conditions faced by the two nations involved in the conflict. The abundance of resources in the United States, vividly contrasting with the austere conditions experienced in war-torn Germany, provided a poignant commentary on the differing socio-economic landscapes during this tumultuous time. Camp Concordia, located in the heart of the American Midwest, was one of many POW camps established to house German soldiers captured during the war. The camp's design was meticulous and adhered to the guidelines set by the Geneva Convention, which ensured that prisoners were treated humanely. However, the daily life of a POW was far from simple, as it involved a strict regimen of activities that contributed to the camp's operation. Labor assignments were a crucial part of this routine, designed not only to maintain the prisoner's physical health and discipline, but also to contribute to the American war effort. These labor assignments often included agricultural work or logistical support in nearby facilities. The POWs were tasked with various jobs, from planting crops and tending to livestock to assisting in the organization and distribution of supplies. These tasks were dictated by the War Department circulars, which outlined the permissible labor activities for POWs under international law. The POWs found themselves integrated into the American agricultural landscape, learning new skills and adapting to the rhythms of rural life in the United States. Within the logistics facility, the POWs played a vital role in sorting and organizing food supplies intended for distribution to nearby towns. This facility operated with a precision that reflected the American industrial efficiency, a stark contrast to the resource-strapped environment the POWs were accustomed to in Germany. However, it was the casual discarding of food that left a lasting impression on the German prisoners. Slightly bruised fruit and unfinished meals were routinely tossed into large bins, an act that was both bewildering and unsettling for those who had experienced severe rationing and food shortages. The sight of such wastefulness highlighted a fundamental difference in the cultural attitudes towards resources. In Germany, every scrap of food was carefully preserved, with even potato peels boiled to extract every possible nutrient. The American officer supervising the facility offered an explanation for the apparent waste that was both pragmatic and dismissive. Not worth the paperwork. This statement encapsulated a broader American perspective on efficiency and pragmatism, emphasizing a preference for streamlined operations over the meticulous conservation of resources. For the POWs, this attitude was alien, a stark reminder of the differing priorities between their homeland and the country that held them captive. The camp's structured environment, governed by regulations from the U.S. Army Provost Marshal General Records, ensured that POWs were treated in accordance with international standards. Although their daily lives were regimented, the camp also offered opportunities for education and engagement with American society. This exposure was part of a broader effort to dismantle Nazi beliefs and introduce democratic ideals to the prisoners. Educational programs covered a range of subjects, from language classes to political discussions, aimed at broadening the POWs' perspectives and preparing them for life after the war. Interactions with American civilians, though limited, further underscored the cultural differences between the two groups. The POWs' engagement with local communities was often mediated by camp authorities, who sought to maintain a balance between security and cultural exchange. These interactions were marked by a pragmatic understanding of the roles each party played, with the POWs contributing labor and the Americans providing oversight and resources. Despite these limitations, the interactions were enlightening for the POWs, offering them a glimpse into American life and values. As the war drew to a close, the prospect of repatriation loomed large in the minds of the POWs. The end of the conflict promised a return to their homeland, yet the uncertainty of what awaited them was palpable. Germany, devastated by years of war, presented a landscape of challenges and opportunities. The POWs, having witnessed the abundance and efficiency of American society, faced the daunting task of reintegrating into a nation that was rebuilding from the ashes. The stark contrasts they had observed in the United States would inevitably shape their perspectives and influence their roles in post-war Germany. The process of repatriation involved a series of debriefings and evaluations aimed at assessing the POWs' readiness for return. These assessments, conducted by military and civilian personnel, focused on the POWs' attitudes and understanding of democratic principles. The goal was to ensure that, upon their return, they would contribute positively to post-war German society, free from the ideological constraints that had defined their past. The experience at Camp Concordia, particularly the moments of contrast between American abundance and German scarcity, became a defining aspect of the POW's narrative. These moments, devoid of overt emotional expression, served as a reflection on the broader socio-economic disparities that defined the wartime experience. The realization that defeat extended beyond the battlefield, embodied in the surplus of resources casually discarded, was a profound acknowledgment of the global shifts in power and prosperity. As the POWs departed Camp Concordia, their understanding of the world had been irrevocably altered. The insights gained from their time in the United States, both in terms of cultural exposure and practical experiences, would accompany them as they returned to a changed Germany. The narrative of waste and abundance witnessed in the logistics facility remained a testament to the broader implications of wartime realities. It served as a poignant commentary on the disparities that define human societies, offering insights into the challenges and opportunities that arise from such profound historical moments. The story of the German POWs at Camp Concordia, while rooted in historical fact, serves as a broader reflection on the complexities of war and the human experience. It highlights the interplay between cultural values, resource management, and the ideological shifts that occur in the wake of global conflict. Through the lens of these prisoners, the narrative of abundance and scarcity becomes a commentary on the disparities that define human societies. It offers insights into the challenges and opportunities that arise from such profound historical moments, illustrating the lasting impact of war on the human spirit. As these German soldiers returned home, they carried with them the lessons learned in captivity, shaping their perspectives and influencing their roles in the post-war reconstruction of their homeland. The experience of German POWs at Camp Concordia remains a powerful reminder of the enduring complexities of war and the transformative power of cultural exchange. The German prisoners of war, POWs, at Camp Concordia engaged in a daily routine that was as much about labor as it was about confronting a new reality. Their work at the logistics facility became a microcosm of the broader contrasts between their homeland and the United States. The facility itself was a bustling hub of activity, characterized by a level of efficiency and an abundance of resources that stood in stark contrast to the scarcity and rationing that had defined their lives in wartime Germany. Each day, the POWs would arrive at the logistics facility, a sprawling complex of warehouses and loading docks where they were tasked with sorting through crates of food and supplies. The sight of these goods, piles of fresh produce, sacks of flour, and cans of preserved foods, was a constant reminder of the abundance that seemed to define American life. The German soldiers, who had grown accustomed to making do with less, were often taken aback by the sheer volume of goods that passed through their hands. As they sorted through the crates, the POWs couldn't help but notice the American workers' apparent indifference to waste. Apples with minor blemishes were tossed aside, sometimes for no more than a bruise or a small imperfection. Bread with crusts that were only slightly hardened was discarded without a second thought. Even vegetables that had lost just a hint of their vibrant color were deemed unfit for consumption. This casual attitude towards food waste was both foreign and unsettling to the German prisoners, who had been taught the value of conservation and resourcefulness from a young age, principles that had been reinforced by the harsh realities of life in wartime Germany. These observations weren't confined to the logistics facility. The POWs' work assignments often took them to nearby farms and industries, where they encountered the same pervasive sense of American plenty. Fields of corn stretched across the Kansas landscape, their tall stalks reaching towards the sky, swaying gently in the breeze. Silos stood tall, filled to the brim with grain, their contents a testament to the productivity and capacity of American agriculture. In the local town, stores were stocked with goods that seemed like unattainable luxuries to the POWs, who had once relied on ration books and soup kitchens to survive. The camp itself, managed under the guidelines established by the U.S. Army Provost Marshal General's Office, adhered strictly to the Geneva Convention stipulations regarding the treatment of prisoners. This included providing adequate nourishment, which the POWs received in the form of 3 meals a day. These meals weren't extravagant, but they were consistently satisfying, offering a balanced diet that ensured the prisoners remained healthy. In this controlled setting, the consistent availability of food was yet another reminder of the disparities between their current environment and the conditions they had left behind. Educational programs were a key component of the camp's operation, designed with the dual purpose of occupying the POWs' time and introducing them to democratic ideals and American culture. These programs included lectures on American history and governance, English language classes, and discussions about the principles of democracy. The goal was to subtly encourage the prisoners to consider perspectives beyond authoritarian rule, to open their minds to different ways of thinking and living. This exposure, coupled with their observations of American life, prompted many of the POWs to reevaluate the narratives that had been ingrained in them through years of German propaganda and wartime hardship. As the war drew to a close, the world watched as Germany's unconditional surrender in May 1945 marked the end of a devastating conflict. For the prisoners at Camp Concordia, this moment signaled an impending return to a homeland that had been deeply scarred by the war. The repatriation process was governed by War Department circulars, which outlined the methodical steps required to ensure each prisoner was accounted for and prepared for their eventual return. The logistics of transporting thousands of POWs across the Atlantic were complex, requiring coordination with the International Red Cross and other agencies to ensure a smooth transition. The POWs at Camp Concordia, like their counterparts in other camps across the United States, faced a future filled with uncertainty. News of the widespread destruction, food shortages, and political upheaval in Germany reached them through various channels, painting a grim picture of a nation struggling to recover. They knew that the Germany they would return to would be very different from the one they had left, and they were unsure of what role they would play in its rebuilding. Despite the challenges that lay ahead, the experiences at Camp Concordia left an indelible mark on the POWs. The exposure to the American way of life, with its emphasis on abundance and individual freedom, contrasted sharply with their previous understanding of power and prosperity. The logistical facility, with its mountains of discarded food, served as a potent symbol of this new awareness, highlighting the differences in values and priorities between the two cultures. As the repatriation efforts commenced, the POWs departed Camp Concordia with mixed emotions. The camp had been a place of confinement, a reminder of their status as prisoners in a foreign land. Yet it had also been a place of learning and reflection, a unique opportunity to observe and engage with a culture that was vastly different from their own. The memories of their time in Kansas and the lessons gleaned from observing American society would accompany them back to a Germany on the brink of reconstruction. For the American personnel involved in the operation of Camp Concordia, the experience of managing POWs had been an exercise in balancing military duty with humanitarian obligations. The camp's commandant and staff worked diligently to uphold the standards set forth by international agreements, mindful of the broader implications for post-war relations. They recognized that the treatment of POWs during their time in captivity could have lasting effects on the prisoners' perceptions of the United States and its values. In the years following their return, many former POWs contributed to the rebuilding of Germany, drawing upon the skills and knowledge acquired during their captivity. The cultural exchange that had occurred, albeit within the confines of a prison camp, played a role in shaping their perspectives on governance, economy, and society. Some former POWs even reported that their experiences in America had influenced their views on democracy and personal freedom, encouraging them to embrace these ideals in the post-war era. The narrative of Camp Concordia and its German prisoners thus stands as a testament to the complexities of war and its aftermath. It highlights the profound impact of cultural exposure and the ways in which wartime experiences can influence peacetime contributions. For the POWs, their time at Camp Concordia represented a unique chapter in their lives, one that offered a glimpse into a different way of life and opened their eyes to new possibilities. As they returned to a Germany in need of reconciliation and renewal, the lessons learned during their captivity would play a crucial role in shaping the future of their nation. Following their departure from Camp Concordia, the German prisoners of war returned to a nation grappling with immense challenges. Germany, in the throes of rebuilding, was marked by widespread destruction and a pressing need for reconstruction efforts. The returnees found themselves in a landscape dramatically altered by the ravages of war, with cities in ruins and a populace facing severe shortages of basic necessities. The skills and perspectives the POWs acquired during their time in the United States became invaluable as they reintegrated into civilian life. Many former prisoners utilized their knowledge of agriculture, logistics, and technical skills gained from work assignments in the camp to contribute to Germany's economic recovery. This period of rebuilding called for both physical labor and innovative thinking, areas where the POWs' experiences proved beneficial. The ideological exposure to democratic principles and economic prosperity in the United States also influenced the repatriated soldiers. As Germany transitioned towards a more democratic system, the former POWs' familiarity with these concepts facilitated their adaptation to and participation in the new political landscape. This ideological shift, although subtle, was part of the broader re-education efforts that occurred during their captivity. The memories of American abundance and the contrast with wartime scarcity in Germany remained a poignant reminder of the disparities they had observed. These experiences informed their perspectives on efficiency and resource management, influencing both personal practices and broader societal approaches to rebuilding. In the post-war years, the narrative of the German POWs at Camp Concordia became a part of the larger story of reconciliation and transformation. Their time in Kansas, marked by structured routines and cultural exchange, had provided unexpected insights that shaped their contributions to a changing Germany. This chapter of history underscores the complexities of war's aftermath and the enduring impact of cultural interactions on the path to recovery. In conclusion, the experience of the German POWs in the United States serves as a historical reflection on the contrasts between scarcity and abundance, and the ways in which exposure to different socio-economic systems can influence post-conflict rebuilding efforts. The lessons learned during captivity at Camp Concordia played a significant role in shaping the lives of these former soldiers and their contributions to the reconstruction of their homeland, highlighting the transformative power of cross-cultural encounters during times of profound change.